Hey guys, it's Hink here. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, how do I know if I'm growing? So what I want to do today is give you guys a tier list, S through F, of basically what I think are the most fundamentally sound ways to basically measure in a more real-time setting and how to know if you're actually progressing or not. Because if you don't know if you're growing, you don't know if you might need to switch something up. Before we get into it, if you guys wouldn't mind hitting the thumbs up button, liking the video, hyping the video, and of course, consider subscribing if you're not a subscriber already. So starting off, guys, it's going to be our S tier, which is our stretched flaccid length. So technically what we're talking about is measuring your bone pressed, meaning you take your ruler, you press it all the way into your fat pad, and then you measure your basically stretched length using a hard ruler. Why is that S tier for me? Well, first of all, there's a lot of evidence to back it. So here's a study here that shows that you're correlating about 80% of your stretched flaccid length and your erect length. Okay, there's about an 80% correlate. Now here's a paper here that actually showed that actually if you induce an erection, meaning you inject something to cause an erection, that there's actually more like a 90% correlation. So we know that it correlates better with actually erect length than some of these other measurements. Now, why I like this measurement is because it's one of the things that increases on the most frequent basis in my experience, guys. All of this is my opinion, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. But especially as I started, one of the first things I noticed was that my stretch flaccid length was increasing on a, I won't say daily basis, but almost a weekly basis, especially in the beginning with the newbie gains. I also think that this is something that should continue to actually increase as you keep going, regardless of where you are. I think if your stretch flaccid length stops increasing in size, then I think you are actually plateauing and you might need to consider switching something up. The other reason I like it is because, once again, you will get erect gains, guys. If you're consistent, I can't promise everybody, but pretty much everybody, if they're consistent, will get erect gains. But sometimes those gains are slow. We're talking about, if you're really lucky and growing really quickly, 1/10 of an inch in a month. Whereas I think, especially starting off, it's not unusual to see your stretch flaccid length increase by about 1/4 of an inch or more in a month. Now, is there evidence to back this? Well, one of the things we have to tease out is, how do you know kind of what pressure to pull with? Well, there's actually a paper that showed that the exact pressure is about 450 grams of force is what you need to basically accurately measure a stretch flaccid length. Now, how much is that, do you say? Well, it's the equivalent of essentially hanging 1 pound like off of your D standing straight up once you account for the force of gravity. So we're not talking about a tremendous amount of force. You just need enough force to, without hurting yourself, but just put yourself in the most extended state that you can without causing pain. I personally don't see what's so hard about that, but I do know guys that struggle with it. But guys, we also have a lot of evidence of different published papers, okay? Here's a paper here that shows where they measured the mean flaccid penile length increase as well as the stretched penile length also significantly increased from 11.5 to +1 centimeter to respectively 12.4. And so these measurements are frequently being recorded and reported upon in this enlargement data. Here's a paper here which didn't even report erect gains, it just reported stretch flaccid length because it's a well-known surrogate. There's another paper here by Neruzzi et al. Where you can see these red diagrams where it actually shows flaccid length and stretched length on basically charted out. So you can see that there's a pretty steady progression. And of course, guys, if you live under a rock and haven't seen my Hink trial where I reported the data on 7 guys with before and after photos that you can see for yourself, that increased on average by 1/2 inch in length and 1/4 inch in girth. The link is in the description if you want to read the paper and see the actual photos for yourself. But here's the data here where you can see the third measurement down, which is bone press stretch flaccid length, increased on average by right at about 1/2 inch. For all those reasons, measuring stretch flaccid length is going to be in your S tier. Scientifically reproducible. I think it gives very good indication of your results. I think your stretch flaccid length precedes your erect length by about 6 to 9 months if you're consistent. So guys, for all those reasons, I think it's S tier. I think it's something that there's science backing it. There's plenty of published data on it. I think it's relatively easy to actually measure correctly using your bone press stretch flaccid length. And I also think it's something that changes relatively quickly, so you can be encouraged when you see regularly that your stretch flaccid length is increasing. So next is going to be our A tier, okay? I think especially when it comes to length, and this is mostly a length-based list, is that measuring your in the pump length is actually very good, okay? But there's a specific caveat. Mainly, you need to be very specific and very methodical in how you do it, guys. You have to understand that the average pressure of an erection is right around 100 millimeters of mercury, which is right at about 4 inches of mercury. In rat studies that have actually looked at enlargement, what they do is they have a very specific method, and I'll put the method on the screen now, but basically what they would do is they would put a little syringe up to the rat's D in a tube, basically pump it up, release it, then pump it up again, and then measure, and that's how they were able to basically induce an artificial erection in a rat to measure length. I personally think that this is a brilliant idea as far as measuring length because, number one, clearly we have scientific background for it, scientific basis, and number two, it kind of takes erection issues out of the equation. And so it's saying under ideal conditions with a reproducible erection over the same pressure, what is your length going to do? And so I think that that's one of the ways that you can continuously measure that should be changing relatively frequently, as well as it can be done in a scientific and reproducible way. All right, guys, so how would I recommend doing it? Well, first, in order to do it, you have to have a pump with a gauge, okay? So this happens to be one of the pumps that we have at peakmalephysique.com. But what you would do is you would put yourself in the tube, okay? And then you would pump up to about 5 inches of mercury, not about to 5 inches of mercury, okay? Things are gonna have to equalize. You're probably gonna have to pump it up, especially as your D engorges with blood. But you would set a timer. So from the second you start pumping, set a timer for 5 minutes, okay? When that timer goes off at 5 minutes, your D should be essentially completely engorged with blood. So then after your timer goes off, you're gonna wait about 60 to 90 seconds and you're gonna pump up to 5 inches of mercury, guys. And set the timer for 5 minutes. As soon as it hits that 5-minute mark, measure where you are in the pump, okay? So 5 inches of mercury for 5 minutes, decompress, 90-second break, 5 minutes at 5 inches of mercury, and then measure. Reproducible, I don't think with that much time, you're really introducing much edema into the mix, and it's something that you should be consistently see yourself and continue to increase in the pump. So I think this is A tier. So next is going to be flaccid size. This one is probably going to be C tier. As you can see here, here's the data from the Hink trial once again, but there was a significant increase in not only flaccid length, but there was also an increase in flaccid girth. And so your flaccid size should increase during this. Once again, here's that paper from Nerwoozy et al. Where you can see that the flaccid length is increasing in addition to the stretch flaccid length. And so there is some correlation with both flaccid and stretch flaccid and erect length should all be consistently increasing. So the problem with this method is that if you are a grower, hashtag acorn gang, you have a very small flaccid at rest, you have a lot of room to become a grower. Guys, if you haven't seen my video on growers versus showers, please check that out. If you haven't seen my video on increasing your flaccid size tier list, please check that out. But the point is, if you're a grower, you could see much more dramatic flaccid size gains than somebody who is a shower, for example, or who has a bigger baseline flaccid. The biggest argument against this is also the fact that flaccid size and erect size does not correlate. In my opinion, when you go through PE, your flaccid size is going to increase, I would say, disproportionately large compared to your erect size. But a lot of that depends on the flaccid state that you're in. But here's the paper here showing that there's no real correlation between flaccid and erect size. So that's why the best we can do is about a C tier for that. So what about erect size? Well, guys, like obviously this is the gold standard because, you know, really what we care about is erect size. Now, I do know that there's a lot of guys who care about flaccid size as well, but most guys want to get bigger in the erect state. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, Hink, why is this not S tier if you're just saying that that's the gold standard? Well, my problem with erect size is that, number one, it takes in my opinion, a long time for you to really see measurable erect gains. Like I just mentioned, a rate of gains, which I would say is a very fast or very good rate of gains, would be 0.1 inch per month. So 1/10 of an inch in a month. That would give you 1.2 inches in a year. You have to understand that the Hink trial, which blew my mind, if you extrapolated for a year, it was about 1 inch in a year, okay? Because they gained 1/2 inch in 6 months. But the point is that I think it's hard to accurately and reproducibly measure when we're talking about 1/10 of an inch on a monthly basis when there's so much in fluctuating as far as even just how hard you press the ruler into your pelvis. And so I think it's hard to accurately measure that until you get to really like 3 or 4 months out and you can say without a doubt, yes. Now, that being said, we have the P-long trial here, which showed basically a consistent increase in length. Of course, we have my Hink trial here, which also showed, for the most part, a pretty consistent increase of length with the standard trajectory. Now, if we were somehow talking about like being able to measure with an erection induced by like an injection, like a prostaglandin injection, then actually I would say that that would be S tier. But, I'd be hesitant to say that because it would involve an injection. But, let me know what you guys think. Do you think just measuring erect length should be S tier, or do you think I have it accurately at A tier, or maybe should it be even lower than that? Now, guys, you can see I go deep into the weeds on this stuff. I have a science-based enlargement course, which I try to make it as efficient for you as possible, as safe for you as possible, and as successful for you as possible, breaking down real medical literature. So if you're interested, please consider checking out my course. The link is in the description below. Now, guys, what about girth measurements, okay? Now, these are a little harder. So obviously, I would say that like erect girth, it would be, measuring that, I would probably put that in A tier as well, just because I think it's really good, but so much of it is going to depend once again on your erection quality. And so ideally, these methods that you can just use consistently and reliably would take like erection quality out of the picture. Okay? But that being said, like I don't like when guys measure using like a C ring, a constriction ring, if you know what I mean. I just think that that introduces basically a false sense of gains. Now, I understand that, if you put it on and don't leave it on for too long and measure right away, it can help with reducing that bias from potentially poor erection quality or whatnot, or maybe even performance anxiety. But I still don't think that that's the best way to measure. Now, for my C tier, as far as measuring girth, I think post-pumped girth. Now, post-pumped girth is harder because you'd basically put yourself in a pump, like pump it up, but you still have to decompress the pump and measure outside of the pump. When it comes to length, you can actually measure length inside the pump because most cylinders have an actual measurement device on there that is at least going to be standardized. But that being said, guys, just because you hit a certain length in the pump doesn't necessarily translate, and you might want to even make sure that you have your cylinder here and you measure with a ruler beside it so you can see how the actual numbers line up, okay? But when it comes to measuring post-pump girth, I think that you should consistently see those numbers increase, okay? I think that's a good indication that you're growing. And so you could do the same method where you'd pump up 5 minutes, 5 inches of mercury, wait 60 seconds, then pump up 5 inches of mercury for 5 minutes, and then measure immediately after. It's a reproducible method, but once again, the problem is as soon as you decompress, you start bringing erection quality issues into the mix, okay? And like, how quickly can you get the tape measure and measure it around? So there's more room for error for that. And so for that reason, I think this is a C tier. So next we have our D tier. And this, I'm going to say just like comments in general. So typically speaking, comments from your significant other. Now, shouts out to all my guys that talk to their significant others about, doing PE. For this specifically, I mean that you do not tell your significant other, guy or girl, that you're doing PE and they make comments like, dude, are you getting bigger? If you haven't seen my interview with Caleb Anthony on my live stream from a couple weekends ago, he talked about how there was girls that he would hook up with and they would be like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but I swear your D is bigger. When you have those comments, I think it's much more an objective measurement because you're not like fishing for a compliment unless you're like, hey, do I feel bigger tonight? And they're like, oh, well, I guess so. And you're like, yes. I don't think that's the same. I mean, unsolicited answers where they're just like, bro, like you're getting bigger. I don't know what's going on. Once again, this is D tier because, guys, I think that at least 30, if not 50% of you guys, if you were to just try like a PDE5 inhibitor like Viagra or Cialis, don't break the law, don't do anything illegal, get the medication from your doctor, all that stuff. But if you were to try that and just have like a rip-roaring erection quality, I bet your partner would be like, dude, you felt huge tonight, or you felt much bigger tonight, okay? Just with that alone. So female anatomy changes based on the menstrual cycle. And so sometimes, especially closer to like actual menses, like the cervix is much lower. We're doing ovulation, the cervix is much higher. You could be bumping into her cervix and be like, yes, I'm getting bigger, but really it's just because you timed it like closer to when she's about to menstruate. So just keep that in mind. But there's way too many factors for just comments from the other person to be anything higher than D tier. Now guys, like what about F tier? Okay, I think that's a tier. Well, I think just like you being like, oh, how does it feel in my hand? Now, I do think that as you do PE, you should be like, dude, it just feels bigger, it just looks bigger, and that's great. And I don't think that you should like negate any of this stuff. What I'm just talking about, a scientific method. Like if you don't have measurements that you can follow in some respect, post-pump, pre-pump, something objective measurements, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. One of my guys that I coached through my Patreon, like awesome dude, but like he doesn't measure. And he's like, yeah, I just kind of go off the way it looks and like comparing pictures. And I'm like, bro, if you're not measuring, you really don't know. And so I think that there's a lot of bias that you can even put in there yourself. And I think most importantly, you can conflate or you can confuse basically your temporary edema. So you get out of the pump, it's all pumped up, it's edematous, and it feels all heavy in your hand, and you're like, yeah, I'm definitely growing, when most of that is actually temporary gains. And so that's why I think you have to be really careful when it comes to just like how it feels and how it looks like when it comes to yourself. So guys, that's going to do it. Let me know what you think. Am I way off? Is there anything I'm missing? Are there any more standardized approaches that you all take that you feel like is a great way to know if you're growing? Let me know. Everything helps in the comments, guys, and I'm very interested in what you have to say. But remember, guys, there's nothing wrong with self-improvement, but you are enough just as you are. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace and love.
Dr. Hink got the plug on the health, yeah. Got you thinking about your wealth, yeah. In his office, no stealth, yeah. Pinnacle of that below the belt, yeah. Checks and balance, he's managing. Working miracles, no damage. Got you covered, no panicking. Steady calm. In the clinic, no vanishing. Yeah, with Doc Hink, it's the way back.